seminar. Today we have Professor Dolors Armenteras. It's my pleasure to introduce her. She's a Spanish/Colombian researcher. She's a biologist who holds a PhD in geography from King's College London and from the UK. And she's been working in Colombia for more than 20 years now, where she's a full professor at the National University of Colombia. She's focused her research on dynamics and drivers of deforestation and fragmentation in neotropical areas, especially in the Colombian forest, the Andes, and the Amazon. And Dolors is one of the pioneers of the use of remote sensing and spatial analysis and to monitor and model the impact of fires and in the biodiversity of northwestern Amazon forests. And her lab has worked with many different topics, including ecology, spatial analysis, and modeling at landscape scale for biodiversity conservation. He's also done a lot of work and helping advancing our understanding of how ecological processes affect multiple organizational levels in the neotropics. And most recently, she's focused on monitoring and forecasting fire ecology, and her research lab has evaluated how to manage risk reduction in a context of climate change and how to understand fire and how we can help reduce forest degradation and conserve biodiversity. Also, Dolors has contributed as an expert in several international agreements, especially the IPBES, and she's currently the vice president of the International Association of Landscape Ecology. So thank you very much, Dolors, for joining us today. And yeah, the audience is yours. And
thank you very much, Felipe. It's a pleasure to be here with everybody. I have never been to Australia, so and the first time having to be remote, but I think it will open opportunities for us to collaborate. So I'm going to share the screen. Just give me 1 second and make sure that you're seeing the presentation. If it's okay, Felipe, you seeing it? Okay, so I'm just going to talk today of all the things. I mean, I'm professor in landscape ecology at the National University in Colombia. This university is a public university, and I set up a landscape ecology lab in 2007. I used to work in the environmental sector, but I decided that it was too difficult to work and they didn't let me do whatever I wanted to do. So I moved to the university, and it was the best move I've ever done, professionally talking. And I set the lab, and in landscape ecology, it's a multidisciplinary science, but we have addressed several important lines. But today, what I want to say is that we're going to just talk about the advances in fire science and policy, yes, fire policy in Colombia, which is, I thought, and it was a suggestion that it could be something of interest for CBC and us, CBCS, sorry if I say it wrong. The acronyms always, you know, it's difficult for me. And us, because I think it could be a point where we can find some common interest. Anyway, I'm going to talk about these, and I think by now most of you are very well versed where Colombia is, but just in case, just to bring the geographical importance of where Colombia is located in South America. It's so important that it's the northern, it's the country where the Andes enter and split in 3 different mountain ranges, and it's a country where the wettest part of the Amazon basin in South America is, the wettest part, the northwestern part of the Amazon is in Colombia. Also the Orinoco, I'm not sure if you see my mouse, so if I should highlight it somewhere, but anyway, where the Orinoco is a very important basin for South America. So it also has a part of that. And then it has a Caribbean side of it. And then it has a Pacific, the wettest part, one of the wettest locations or the wettest areas in the world. It's located in Colombia. So it has a bit of a very diverse geography that I'm sure that you are well aware. And perhaps today I'm going to focus on just one part of it. But what I wanted to say with you is that our group does research in most of the regions, depending on priorities or circumstances or interests. Anyway, so we have a Caribbean side, we have a Pacific coast, we have an Andean region where the Andes is split in 3 different mountain ranges, and we have the Orinoco and we have the Amazon. In 4 of these regions, fire is a problem. It's a different problem. It's a different, it's driven by different circumstances. And the only reason why in the Pacific coast is not a problem is because it's too wet all year around. So it's almost like impossible to set anything on fire there. So I'm not going to be talking about Pacific. I'm going to be talking about some of the other regions. And I want to acknowledge that we're working in a paradise. Colombia is a country with privileged geography, biodiversity, environmentally. So it's something that has or drove me in the past to move to Colombia to work in science, which was a bit of a challenge. In any case, given the nature of Colombia, one of the first areas where when I moved to Colombia over 2 decades ago, I started developing was measuring and quantifying what was going on with the forest. You might have heard of Colombia in the last few years, but if you look at science 20 years ago, there was not much about what was happening to the forest here. What were the rates of changes, land use, land cover changes? What was the deforestation rate? What were the patterns? What were the drivers of changing our forests in this part of the world? So that was part of the initial, let's say, contribution of my lab to the country, in terms of bringing that information, but bringing that knowledge, bringing that quantification and science into the country, and bringing the country into the scene of having certain data and patterns being acknowledged, and being on the scene of not only being called for other reasons, but because the forests are or were very important or are very important in the region. Anyway, 2 decades ago, we started measuring forest deforestation patterns, drivers. Also, we've done a lot of work on what policies are effective or not, or what were effective at that point on protecting deforestation, halting deforestation in this part of South America. And we started bringing to the debate the importance and the difference between protected areas versus indigenous reserves. In the case of Colombia, protected areas have always been more effective than indigenous reserves in terms of forest cover protection. And bringing the debate that you've seen in the tropics somewhere else, but South America, this part of the north of South America was not being acknowledged as a problem with the link between roads and deforestation, how much and how interlinked these factors are, how roads drive deforestation or don't drive deforestation in some cases. And Colombia has this issue of illicit crops. So we brought to the literature the relationship between illicit crops, the cultivation of illicit crops, and deforestation. Whilst doing that, we also noticed that and things that still are happening today is that when people talk about the Amazon, they just think about Brazil. So that was a gap that we also saw as an opportunity to start filling and to start bringing some knowledge on what was going on in this part of northwestern Amazon, which is key for the hydrological cycle of the whole Amazon basin and of the whole world. And it's in these Andean countries in Colombia, in Ecuador and Peru. So having seen that many things were published in Brazil, but not in this part of the world, we also sort of like started contributing to that knowledge. And one of the things that drove us was the discussion and the debate on fire in the neotropics. Because again, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, many people that you would ask about fire and the dynamics of fire would only tell you about the Brazilian Amazon in South America, like if everything was Brazil. So this has been one of our main driving push for research in the last 15 years, which is contributing to the knowledge whether the fire is an ecological disturbance, it's a catastrophe, or is a land tool land tool that it's used for management for many users and landowners and communities, local communities, indigenous communities. So this is very complex because there's not a single answer. Like I know in Australia you have the same problem, but there was not much on the knowledge of this. So one of the things we first also we filled the gap, which I dare to say, was about measuring. I mean, in 15 years ago, nobody knew how much vegetation was being burned in Colombia. So one of the first things we did is, well, okay, let's understand how much the land is being affected, what's the frequency, what's the difference between regions, what happens in each one of those 5 regions that I told you about, what's the linkage between the climate and these currents of fires and vegetation burning, etc. So that's something that we did over 10 years ago to start contributing and giving some measures. So one dry year could go to 1 million hectares burn. I don't know how much this represents for you when you have many more millions being burned in Australia, but 1 million, over 1 million hectares of vegetation burnt in a year is a lot for Colombia. Colombia has 1 million square kilometers. So that's a lot. Other years, the vegetation burnt is much less. But then you have the difference between the regions. There's regions where you have very extensive burning of vegetation, and then you have regions where you have less, smaller burnings, but area burned, but associated with other things going on. A smaller, but more intensive fires in, for instance, the Amazon, while you get very extensive fires in the savanna regions of Colombia. So that's what we started to bring and see that things are not so easy. One of the things that we have also is this link with the seasonality, not only the years that are El Nino, La Nina, drier or wetter, but then you also have that for some reason, for many reasons, but I mean, the fire season in Brazil, it's in August, September, October, July, August, September, October. And then in the northern part where we are, in north of the equator and in this northwestern part, the fire season is in December, January, February. So the news get the fires in the Amazon in Brazil, and when the fire season extinguishes in Brazil, then we in the north start burning, but because all the news have been addressed or have been addressing the Brazilian fires, then we never get into the news, which is really frustrating because we have the same problem. The seasonality is different. The months where the fire season occurs in Colombia is different, but the pattern is very similar to what happens in the southern part of the continent, or let's say in the central south, where most of the Brazilian Amazon is. So we contributed to that. We associated with the climate, with the seasonality, with the long terms. And also we sort of like tried to bring this point that, hey, the season of fire here is different. So we have to sort of like understand exactly what's going on. And well, it's been a little bit of part of filling those gaps that I was telling you about, or I was trying to tell you about. One of the things also is that if you focus on the Amazon, we demonstrated that fire is being used for deforestation. And it's not only for land as a land management tool in many areas, but the thing is that it's illegally used for advancing the colonization, deforestation frontier. So also what we try to demonstrate is was not only the link with the climate, of course it's linked to the climate, and the Amazon climatic difference and seasonality works different than other parts of the country of Colombia and the other regions. But then you have this relationship with the population, with the conversion to pastures, to the conversion to crops, that, you know, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, they were telling us that we were wasting time studying this because there was no fires and burning was not important in Colombia. So what we tried to do, or what we did, was demonstrate that there was a clear link, and this issue was much more complex than what people wanted to not deal with the decision-making processes that the country needed for stopping deforestation. So fire cannot be unlinked from deforestation in Colombia, in particular in the Amazonian region of Colombia. So we did that, but then you have Colombia is such a dynamic landscape. I mean, even if you try to understand the dynamics of a stable, relatively stable place, then you see that the year by year, you know, things change. This is an example of bringing the cultivation, the illicit crops, and the dynamics of the illicit crops with the pasture, with the cows, and then with fire, and we brought to the attention that this is not an unstable frontier at all. Not even areas that were supposed to be stable are stable, and accountability of carbon dynamics and all whatever decisions you want to make in the territory need to take into account this very high spatial but also temporal dynamics. Year by year things change, these people come, then this dynamic happens, and it's all making things very complex in particularly in this part of the Amazon, in the northwestern part of the Amazon. And one of the other things we contributed to was not only this dynamic of fire, coke, illicit crops, fire, pastures, deforestation, but also we did a study at some point. That this was 2017. I forgot the reference. Oh no, it's there in the graph. It's a study that will show that, okay, many people are saying, you know, the conversion to pasture is the big problem of South America deforestation, but then you go and see into Colombia, and it's not just that. It's not only that you convert to pastures because there is a demand of market of beef, although it's used as a tool for land acquisition, and then you have no link with the revenue, the demand for beef for the domestic markets or whatever. So there's something going on there. So we started bringing the land grabbing concept, quantifying the land grabbing concept of a lot of things are going on in this Northwest Amazonian frontier. It doesn't have to only be with coca. In fact, sometimes there's no coca in very small municipalities, or there was no coca crops in small municipalities, but there was a lot of deforestation, but there was no really a bigger demand. There was the market on beef was not increasing. So it was not due to that. It was due to other speculation with the land, the tithing, and land grabbing, which is happening in some part of this region in Colombia. So you see, Colombia is very complex. So you have to add like pieces of the puzzles on what's explaining the deforestation and what's going on in terms of the region. Since we are a landscape ecology lab, one of the things we also contributed was providing evidence of how fragmentation and fire act in this part of the world, again, in this northwestern part of the Amazon, the more fragmented the forests get, the more occurrence of fires and forest fires and degradation that comes along with all these implications. So we did a study on that has actually was a contribution that help us discuss how important the integrity of these protected areas and the forest fragments in northwestern Amazon were needed for preserving the forests of being affected by fire. One of the issues of this fragmentation was also that fires are affecting both protected areas and indigenous reserve in the same sort of like, let's say, level, the very low affectation in comparison to other areas, but still there are fires inside protected areas in Colombia, even in the Amazon region. But then when there's a fire in a protected area, the emissions are much higher than when there's a small fire in the indigenous territories. The fires that are used for subsistence or for a small farming activities in indigenous territories don't have the impact that have or has a fire that gets into a protected areas. Why? Because the traditional way of using management is different to what other things that are happening in protected areas in regards to deforestation and the fire that it's used to clean areas inside protected areas. Like I said, because I used to work in the environmental sector before moving to the university, we've always had this thing about developing tools for decision making. So with all the knowledge of years of understanding the patterns, the rates, the drivers, and also the links with the fire and how fire was being used in the Amazon, we developed certain tools. One of the tools we did was this, published in 2017, but at that time was already improving the official REDD+ country deforestation early alarms. I don't know how they call them, but we could predict where the deforestation was going to be. So it was like, hey, there's no excuse, you know, where there's going to be in order to take actions for these REDD+ projects that were being implemented in the ground. So we developed these kind of models, and the code is free for the country to use, etc. And basically was saying, hey, in these places where this deforestation frontier, this is what is happening. It's opening, you're opening the pastures are being burned. And then not only the pastures are being burned, but the forest is being burned. And that's where next year is going to advance the frontier. And this example that I'm showing you here is inside a protected area. So you could see the gravity of this situation. With that also, one of the things that my lab contributed and that I wanted to show you was because we sort of like had all these pattern knowledge of how things work in northwestern Amazon when you heard about Colombia signing the peace, and after the peace agreement, we could very rapidly notice a pattern of fires that were not climate related. There was a pattern very special of fires happening in some protected areas that were or had been under the control of illegal groups. So territory that was under guerrilla control previously, and in theory, there should have been a demobilization of these groups. We saw an increase in eightfold, you say it, 10-fold increase in the number of fires, and we could predict the deforestation that was going to happen. And actually, I think the real deforestation was even a little bit worse than what we predicted. So that was our contribution as well. The capacity of being able to understand how this work help us being able to produce this kind of knowledge and information for the country. Whether some people acknowledge that or not, and there was this discussion because previously to that, there was this big optimism that things were going to go very well after the signing of the peace agreement. And let's say that perhaps was one of the first papers that we didn't want to publish, but it was a reality, but that, you know, broke that optimism, at least in terms of deforestation and forest degradation. Other things that we do are on the ground. It's not only, let's say, all these regional and sub-regional models or data or analysis. And some of the projects that we've been able to engage in the last 5 years have been related with the impacts of fire on forest. On the ground, we've been measuring certain areas to evaluate the impact. And believe it or not, I know you're not going to believe it, but this is the first paper actually from Colombia that is a result of these 5 years, for last 5 years of these projects funded by USA. Is the first paper showing the impact of fire on vegetation, developed in Colombia with measurements on the ground, on what's going on when fire affects this forest, right? So maybe you're going to be surprised of this, but you know, having long-term research from Colombia with funds from Colombia is really difficult, and it's very difficult, and some very pressing issues we still don't understand what goes on. So in this case, we proved, I mean, you can say there's going to be a change in forest composition and diversity when fire affects certain forests, but then if you don't prove it, you know, so we bring in the evidence of this. This is the case of a system in the Orinoco, the picture that I have in my background. It's a system of savannas with riparian forests. And there's this theory, again, this debate, that those frontiers between the forest and the savanna are stable, are not stable, or the state is stable, or that the fire, in theory, doesn't penetrate the forest. But we are proving with these studies a little bit what's going on and how the savanna fires are reducing the forest. The savanna is encroaching the forest in this part of the Colombia where we studied. And obviously there's this impact in the forest structure and all the biomass and all the contributions that the country has to take into account when they're measuring carbon emissions or doing these climate reports that they do for the Kyoto Convention and all these political agreements that they do. And they often say that they don't have the data to contribute with certain information. We've also been working on other effects of fires. Again, we've read a lot of literature of what goes on in Australia, because certain systems are relatively similar with the differences. But and one of the things we're measuring is the effects on fauna, which is one of the recent papers that has come out from a PhD student on really measuring what goes on with the habitat of small mammals, non-flying mammals. And this is also the first paper, and you could go and look into the literature, and you will see that it's the first paper published of a study of the impact of somehow fire on fauna in Colombia. So this is a little bit of some of the results. Is just this is a very new paper that it's out, and you can have a look at it if you're more interested. But I just wanted to give you a sort of like a picture of what we're doing. We have also worked in the impact of the fire in the mountain forest in the Andes. Like I was telling you, one of the key species in Colombia is the oak, the Andean oak, and the Andean oak was heavily affected by some fires in certain areas. So we've been working on that, but this is a very different system from what I've just showed you, that it's a savanna, flat, riparian, mosaic, and this is sort of like mountain, very steep slopes with certain species. So we've been doing that as well. And one of the things that we came across, and then I have a few more slides just to summarize what we're doing, and I think this is something that also we can learn from Australia, is it's building some going to all these regions where they have all these problems with fires and you're really interested in biodiversity only, it's very difficult because the social situation of all these places makes you to be involved and try to help or understand the solutions or whatever. So we've been doing a lot of participatory approaches without being trained into this, but we've been doing it on building knowledge within the local communities and hearing and discussing with the stakeholders different situations in relation with fire and deforestation, which is what we're talking about today. And from that, worry and concern and people being desperate, different actors being desperate about what was going on with fire and the fire getting worse and worse and worse, we developed a proposal for an integrated fire management law in the country. The country doesn't have one. The country only had the suppression, the firefighting of fires, and it's really it's underfunded and the capacity is very limited. And with climate change, we're having more and more fires. I think this is something common, very common with Australia as well, with different circumstances, what activity produces that fire, whatever. But we built this with a lot of actors all over the country, and we filed this forest fire bill in 2019. The forest fires bill or whatever, any law in the country has to go through a legislative process, like I'm sure in Australia is the same. And in Colombia, it has to pass several steps. We are so far more than halfway the process. We still have 2 debates in the Senate to be fully approved, out of 4 debates and a public hearing. So this bill was constructed based on the evidence that we have been providing and other groups, but mostly I'm bringing you our contribution. It was our group that went to the Senate and proposed the bill and proposed an idea of bringing this integrated fire management in the country. So I just wanted to show you an example of how to do a bit of everything. Perhaps is an example of commitment of many of the students that wanted to do something for the country and bringing the knowledge and we were building in the group into action, into a policy that is needed in the country. We've also, like I said, we always have this step in between doing some more basic research, fun, more biodiversity stuff with the reality of the country, but then with providing some tools and also some advice on policy. So we've been, this is one of the collaboration with Pablo, with the CBCS, but also other staff that has been contributing to this discussion in the country about which policies and how to propose ways of solving this big problem of deforestation, in particular in the Amazon, but other regions, like I said, they have other problems. And I'm really thankful that you invited me to this seminar, because one of the things that I decided to do a few years ago was talk about the visibility problem of science from the South. And I don't want to miss the opportunity of mention that where you base matters, and in the global South we do have a lot of difficulties in terms of funding, infrastructure, but we do have those landscapes, so that's a benefit. But also that we to publish our results is much harder, and so it is a pleasure to be with you and that you've given me the opportunity of sharing this. There is also the visibility problem with women in science, and I also, again, I appreciate, because I know this is an opportunity for us to take the opportunity to discuss these things and to bring the point of how much I appreciate being able to present these results to you. These are just to finalize some of the conditions under which we work. Sharing the transportation, double transportation, sharing the yeah, how you say, with the fish load in a very old plane to get to certain areas, with the bikes in a very remote area in a boat, without light and all these kind of conditions. But is the way we do work here, and contributing to this kind of research and being able to explain to you is really important for us. Finally, just want to highlight one of the collaborations, the recent collaboration that has come out with Australia is this paper. I don't know if you know it. It was led by Professor Driscoll. It's the most recent and very sort of like relatively long-term collaboration over 2 years, 2.5, 3 years working on this review. And I'm hoping that this opportunity will bring us more possibilities of collaboration in the future. Although I already know some of the Colombians that are working there with you. It will be, I mean, we are very happy to strengthen somehow any collaboration that you might think it's of interest. Finally, I mean, there's a lot of partners and funders that have helped us do this research. Again, funding research, scientific research in Colombia is not easy. So all these collaborations are key for the success of science in Colombia, and building capacity in Colombia. And from Colombians, I'm hoping that many of the Colombians that are there will get back to the country. Not that I want to extract the resource from Australia, but hopefully they'll soon come back and contribute to this hard effort. So having said that, I mean, this is just sort of like big overview of what we've done, what we have contributed in terms of, like I said, in the fire and deforestation arena more than anything. And I'm more than welcome to discuss with you any questions you have or any potential collaboration that we might be opening from today on. So thank you.